Oh my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
With the second pick in the 2011 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Von Miller, linebacker, Texas A&M.
He's the greatest ever, huh?
And then I just wanted
When you got all the advantages, it's easy.
Welcome to the Aggie War Pod, a product of the Republic of Football Podcast Network and Dave Campbell's Texas Football. I am your co-host, Mike Craven, senior writer at Dave Campbell's. The other voice you'll hear on this podcast is a barbecue eating machine who won't shy away from a road trip or an off-key rendition of Creed. The former fighting Texas Aggie defensive lineman arrived in College Station as a three-star prospect back in 2013. He now resides in Houston, but his heart never left. Ladies, gentlemen, reveille, I present the one, the only, Jay Arnold.
Man, it feels like it's been ages since we've hopped on here to talk Aggie football, but always good to be back with spring right around the corner. Figured we should link up again and talk about what's ahead.
We'll talk about this in a second. I want to say spring is my favorite season. I know it should be fall because of football, but I am a sucker for spring. I enjoy it. It feels here. Outside, it feels like summer. Don't know if you've been outside. We were recording this on Tuesday. It'll probably change by the time you hear this. But today, I think I sweat for the first time during a dog walk in 2024. I think it was the first time I felt a little perspiration by the time I got back home with Taco Dog. So we're almost there. It'll be summer before we know it. We'll still call it spring, kind of like we call winter, even though it's not at all really winter anymore. On this podcast, we will talk spring practices. Those are right around the corner. Spring game set for April 20th at 1 p.m. at Kyle Field. We'll kind of talk a little bit about, what can be accomplished in spring practice, what we're looking for in spring practice, what fans should expect with the Mike Elko regime change, what the offense will look like, defense, and players that we're looking to watch. We'll kind of hit on everything as much as we can. We'll also go into fourth down and we'll talk about whatever we want. Probably a little bit about the NCAA football game, maybe possible playoff expansion before the new expansion even happens. A lot going on in college football. It is a 12-month out of the year cycle these days. Before we get going, though, we are proud to be partners with Home Field Apparel. Use promo code WHOOP, WHOOP, for 15% off your first purchase. Please rate us a 5-star. Let your friends know about the podcast. We only grow with your help. If you'd like to help grow this podcast by advertising, please contact Jay or I in the Twitter DMs, the X DMs. That could get dangerous there. Jay, this is kind of the start of season 2 of the Aggie War Pod. We started this little show back in 2023 when we launched the Republic of Football Network. We're going into 2024 now. No more Jimbo Fisher. Let's all celebrate and have a good time and enjoy the 2024 year. It was a great first year. We appreciate all the listens. Let's avoid a sophomore slump. But first of all, before we get into spring practice, I wanted to ask you, what have you been up to? We haven't really recorded since National Signing Day. I've seen NASCAR races become a big part of your life. So what's Jay Arnold been up to in the month of February?
Yeah, the Daytona 500, the first NASCAR points race of the year is in February, and that's what helps get me through the dark times of the off season. And I'm really cranking up the NASCAR content lately, trying to stay as busy as possible. Watching a little bit of MMA, some, the polar opposite, right? Where a guy sitting in a car versus two guys just trying to fight each other. But sometimes in NASCAR, fights happen as well. It's been a lot of fun. I've been actually doing some jiu-jitsu on the mats a lot myself, playing rugby, which basically just trying to keep myself as occupied as I can. How about you?
I haven't been up to much at all, to be honest with you. Writing a book, so just kind of been plugging away at that. And then it's all of a sudden magazine season at Dave Campbell's Texas Football, starting to do research on the rosters, which is harder and harder every single year. I have no idea who's coming back, who's added, who's not added. You got to go through each roster. Luckily, the SIDs across the state have mostly updated their roster, so you can start cross-checking and seeing if that person is still there or not there. So now, planning a wedding. I'm getting married on March 23rd. So it's been relatively busy in the Craven household. I wanted to tell you this, and maybe I should have saved this for fourth down, but I watched the Netflix kind of documentary on the Sixes or whatever that is.
Yeah, Six Nations.
Oh man, that I
Incredible.
I might become a rugby guy. Like that was a lot of fun. I thought the same thing about the F1 series though, and that hasn't caught up on me in terms of like fandom, but Netflix is doing a great job of like trying to grow these kind of niche sports that like maybe you wouldn't stumble upon to yourself. But when condensed down in the way that they are, you watch the tennis one and you're like, oh man, like tennis is badass. I need to watch some tennis. So I did want to tell you that because I know you're a rugby guy.
Yeah, this, like you said, it's a great way to introduce people to the sport.
Yeah.
Because when you get those like behind the scenes stories and you make people care about the athletes or the drivers or whatever, uh, people get more invested, right?
Yeah.
Like if they're not gambling on it, they got to find a way to get invested.
Yeah.
So
No, you got to personalize it. It's why I tell
exactly.
anybody who's trying to get into like European soccer, the first thing I tell them to do is pick a team,
Yeah.
right? Because if you pick a team and you have something to root for, then it all kind of falls into place. Then it gives you kind of a starting point for there. I think those shows give you get an idea of who you like and who you don't like, and that's different for every single person. It gives you somebody to root for and somebody to root against, and then you can kind of build your fandom for there. So I really like that show. I recommend that to anybody looking for something to cure their boredom during this time of year. Let's jump into why people are listening to the show. If they're listening to the show and it's not my Netflix watching habits, spring practices getting going across the country. Some teams starting this week and then taking a week off for spring break. Some teams just waiting for spring break to happen and then starting afterwards. That seems to be what the Texas A&M Aggies are going to do. Kind of wait until after spring break to really get rocking and rolling. For those who don't know, it can get a little weird on the spring practice rules. Each team gets 15 on-field practices over a 34-day period. That's why teams can kind of mess with when they start and when they finish. 12 can be contact practices. 8 can involve tackling. 3 can be 11 on 11 scrimmages. One of those being the spring game for A&M. It is April 20th at 1 p.m. at Kyle Field. The groans you're hearing are old people listening to this podcast who are just now learning that you can only hit 8 times during the spring instead of like every day 3 times during 3 days or however they were practicing back in the day. Jay, I know that you didn't do a lot of spring practices during your time as a college student because you were overcoming injuries during that time.
I
But
was on
what
Muscle Beach.
you're on Muscle Beach, but like for fans, right, who have never kind of gone through a spring practice, kind of what are the overall kind of goals? What are you hoping to do as a team and as a staff during that month?
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of evaluating what you have on the roster, seeing, your players that finished up the previous season have moved on. You got to see who's going to step up. You got to see what guys have improved. You look at the big areas where you had issues this previous season. That's going to be something that you try to iron out during spring. And then it's also just like making sure you're keeping guys' heads on. And it can be tough during spring because you don't have that light at the end of the tunnel of an
Mhm.
opponent to focus on. Your opponent is yourself. But really, it's just kind of evaluating. It's more of a learning period, and especially with Mike Elko coming in, where it's a
Right.
new staff. There's some added knowledge that people have to find out about each other, how the roster is going to work. So it's really a big deal for new coaching staffs. But it's always going to be a learning period, no matter if it's a coach that has been there for 5 years or a coach that's fresh in.
Yeah, it feels like it's going to be a lot of install. Because also now, I mean, you're gone all of January recruiting as a new staff, right? Like whether it be transfer portal. I remember during the National Signing Day press conference with Elko, which was that first week of February, he said he had been in the offices 3 days in January because the rest of the time he was out on the road recruiting, making relationships, meeting coaches across the state, doing all that kind of stuff. So you're behind the 8 ball, right? Like you're going to have to get your new offense in, your new defense in. So this is more practicing for your mind than practicing for your body necessarily.
Yeah, and that's why you don't need as many of the contact days, right? Like
Mhm.
it's more of, like you said, install. learning the defense that you're going to be running, learning the offense that you're going to be running, and again, just trying to get those mental reps in too, putting stuff on film and addressing issues and positioning and it's again, like you said, the way recruiting works now means that there has not been a lot of time for these guys to interact with the guys that are currently on roster. Like you said, they've been out building relationships with coaches in state. I know that's a big part of what Mike Elko wanted to do as well, is kind of get in the good graces of the Texas high school football coaches. Uh, so it's going to be interesting to see like how install works. You know, if different personnel, right? Like you have all the transfer guys in too. That's
Hmm.
going to be a part of the adjustment. So it's really an intriguing time, but as a fan, I don't know if you get as much out of it, right? Like you're not seeing the on-field product as much as it is going to be uh, a difference for the guys that are kind of in the program.
I implore fans out there to stop taking so much stock in the behind the scenes recruiting website practice reports that are behind closed door. You know, like so and so is looking great and so is faster than ever and so is dominating. Like you got to think about where that is coming from. And it's usually a lot of times still the recruits that are now on campus or their families or assistant coaches trying to send messages or so like, you know, take it with a grain of salt. I always laugh because like if the offense is having a great time, does that mean the defense stinks or you know you just don't understand? What I'm curious about though is for a lot of guys, I mean 40 plus guys on this roster. I guess more than that since this is a new coaching staff. They've only talked to these coaches about what life is going to be like with them as coaches. And you're recruiting them and you're selling them on a dream and how great it's going to be and how good this stuff is. And look at our resources. And here's the NIL and here's your dorm or your apartment or whatever you're going to live in. But like it gets real at some point where like these guys are your coaches and like you played football for a long time. I've been around football for a long time. Like it's not always rosy. Is there kind of like a welcome to football kind of moment where these coaches have to go from the guys that recruited you to the guys who are now, you know, coaching you?
I mean, the moment they step on that field for the first time in the spring is going to be that kind of moment. And you'll have like even before that with the strength and conditioning staff, you get kind of try
Yeah, I
to
guess
it's
true.
almost like a burn you out type moment. Like you got to kind of test and see how far guys can go. It's like a boot camp moment where they're testing your ability to take coaching advice and to think under pressure, uh, which that alone is going to be tough. But then yeah, you get really the first time you step out on the field and start doing drills and you're getting yelled at and told what to do. It's like a hey, this isn't recruiting anymore. Like
Yeah.
you actually have to play the game of football and get coached up.
I love my favorite day of fall practices is the first one when you're allowed to go and kind of watch the warm-ups because it feels like the coaches always like are cussing out some of the freshmen. You know, like especially some of the higher recruited ones, you know, or whatever. It's like, who is so and so cussing at? And it's like, oh, it's like some five-star guy or whatever. Maybe it's just to set the tone to like let everybody know that anybody can get yelled at and all that kind of stuff. But like I always have heard coaches kind of downplay the de-recruiting concept, but I've never heard players downplay it. You know, like players always talk about that it's real, and coaches are like, no, 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 we don't do that. And it's like, I don't know. Everybody who's ever played for you says that you do. So I'm going to believe them.
Yeah, maybe it's a subconscious thing. Maybe the coaches don't mean to, but you do kind of have to like remind the guys because again, we talk about this all the time. Each guy that's coming in there was the guy on his
Mhm.
campus in high school. And you have to be disabused of that notion quickly whenever you come and play college football. And I think the coach getting after you a little bit is a big part of that experience.
Yeah. And during recruiting, you need to be a friend to these guys a lot of times, like at least a mentor, you know, but then like you got to remind them that you're not their buddy. You know,
Yeah.
like they got money riding on it. Nowadays, you got money riding on it. Like this is a business and there's no hiding from it anymore. Like maybe you could throw that under the mat back in the student athlete days and everybody doing this, you know, for the love of the game and stuff. But like it's above board now. Guys are getting paid, coaches are getting paid, people are trying to get in the NFL. You're trying to win football games, right? And so like there is an important reminder of like, okay, like the recruiting thing is over, you know, like let's go to work. Before we move on to actually breaking down spring, I wanted to ask you this. Dana Holgerson, who now is no longer the head coach at Houston, he talked to me multiple times over the last couple of years about how spring practices need to go the way of the dinosaur and it needs to be OTAs, right? There doesn't need to be hitting. There doesn't need to be this expectation of a spring game. And his explanation for it made sense to me. And this is what it was. You always lose the seniors, right? You're always losing 20 to 30 guys from the roster the year before. You're always losing 10 to 15 to 20% more of the guys who are coming back to injury, the Jay Arnolds of the world, who can't, they're on the roster, they're on scholarship, but the football's a brutal sport. And like, you can't turn around and play in March again, right? So like, you're down 40 scholarship players, let's say, on average right then. Then nowadays, you add the transfer portal, right? And then you're bringing in kids that are supposed to be in their last semester of their senior year in early to replenish those ranks, plus other transfer portal guys. His point is that, like, you got 40 scholarship players, 20 of them are new and just walked in the door. 10 of them are 17, barely just turned 18. You can't do a lot with that, right? Like, it needs to be more of just the teaching and the learning. What are your thoughts about like doing away with like spring as we know it and turning it more into just an OTA in the NFL kind of spring session looking?
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense to do that, especially because on the flip side of it too, like not just guys that are missing due to injury from the fall. You also have guys get hurt during spring, and then they're not healthy by the fall, right? But yeah, I mean, it's there are so many variables when it comes to it, and I realize that you know part of the reason that you have the spring football in college is that these guys aren't as experienced as like NFL guys. They haven't been through the process as long. Uh, but when you look at, the investment into the guys, with NIL and everything, and then also the fact that you're having so much roster turnover, it makes sense to do more non-contact stuff and do more of the OTA, mental rep install type of practices, just because at the end of the day, like there's too much attrition. There's too many bodies that are going to be missing, and you run the risk of having more bodies missing going through spring and doing contact.
And these guys aren't taking huge breaks and smoking heaters and hanging out, like it's not the 1960s anymore. Like they all have individual trainers. They're working out all the time. Like it's not as much of a separation of church and state between like the end of football season and the start of spring. Like you don't just completely walk away. You're still doing a lot of working out. You're still with the guy. Like you're staying in shape, right? So I think we're moving more and more towards it organically. As we talked about, like there's no two-a-days anymore. They're not banging heads every single practice. But it will be interesting because people love the spring game. Like fans, as much as it doesn't matter, like you just like going to the stadium. You like seeing the team. You want to see the new faces and and kind of what numbers they're wearing and stuff. But you can tell more and more coaches are moving away from even pretending to have one, because you end up with 7 offensive linemen by the end of spring. And like, how do you have a game when you got 7 offensive linemen out there? And so, anyway, let's move into second down and the offensive preview. Talk a little bit about what we expect from the Aggies. I suppose the best place to start is, what do you think this offense looks like with Colin Klein as the offensive coordinator? It feels like it's going to be a relatively seismic shift from what Jimbo Fisher, Bobby Petrino were doing.
Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about it, and we wondered if Colin Klein is going to change his offense a little bit just based off the personnel that he has at A&M, with the ability to recruit probably a little bit better caliber of athlete at Texas A&M versus Kansas State. You also wonder about the quarterback position, obviously with Connor Wegman. I think I've said this 1,000 times. I don't really want to see Connor Wegman running quarterback power, and I think that was a big feature of the Kansas State offense. So I am interested to see, and maybe Colin Klein is a guy that adapts based on what quarterback he has in, and maybe there's certain calls that are made with Wegman that aren't made with, whoever's backing him up. So it'll be interesting to see what the offense looks like. Obviously, with the receivers, I mean the personnel groupings. I just can't help but be intrigued about the change. Like you mentioned, it feels like it's going to be a pretty seismic shift. I feel like you're going to have more power in this offense, whether that comes from uh, personnel groupings or just the run schemes. If it's more gap scheme type stuff than zone in the past, I do feel like there's going to be a pretty significant change in what the offense looks like.
Do you see any scenario in which Connor Wegman is not the starting quarterback if healthy for Texas A&M in 2024?
I don't personally, just because I think the talent that he showed when he was healthy was pretty obvious. I felt like Wegman gave A&M a pretty clear number one QB, and I do think there's plenty of talent in that room. I mean, what Marcel Reed did in the bowl game was extremely impressive, right? Uh, but I just think that I can't justify taking the starting position away from Connor Wegman. Uh, and again, like things can happen. You never know how he's going to heal up coming off of a season-ending injury. There could be a scenario where that changes things, but I just see Connor Wegman as number one.
Yeah, I think the only way in which that happens is if Klein really is married to what we saw the exact system being in Kansas State, and he thinks, some Reed or Henderson or somebody runs that better, just their ability to run or stay healthy running makes that better. But I'm with you. I mean, I was a huge Connor Wegman guy coming out of high school. I think he's a 5-star quarterback with a ton of talent. I hope to see him stay healthy and get some real games under his feet with some protection. I think he's going to be really good. I think the position group that should be most excited about Klein's hire is the running back group. I think if you're Moss, your Daniels, your Owens, you're going to get a lot of carries. You're going to get a physical offensive line. You're going to go downhill. I don't think we have like that. You feel pretty good about that group. I feel like A&M's got conference championship level running back play if the offensive line is good.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, there were some issues with ball security at times last year, but I do feel like the running back position is good, especially if like Alavion Moss, if he stays healthy. He had some really impressive games. I mean, his performance against Arkansas was
Mm-hmm.
super impressive. I think we were both excited about that. But again, that depends on him staying healthy. Ruben Owens flashed his talent at times, but it never really showed out. But again, you have to wonder how much that is the offense from last year and maybe getting downhill and you know honestly, I think the offensive line can benefit from this scheme too,
Oh
right? Like
yeah.
a little more of a power and get downhill than moving side to side. I think that's a benefit for this offense as well.
And I don't have the empirical data for this. This is just my opinion here. But I also think jumping from 3A football to SEC is not the same as going from like Katy or something. Like that's from playing from the El Campo Rice Birds, right, to playing in Kyle Field is just different. Like that's just going to be a harder transition. I have that same worry with Terry Bussey in terms of our not worry in terms of him ability to do it, but our expectations for them to do it right away, right? Like you're not coming from Duncanville, you're not coming from Cedar Hill or North Shore, where you're playing against all these other future college players, where you kind of get an idea of what it's going to be like to not be the best player on the field. Like Ruben Owens had always been able to run around any defender that was standing in the hole, whereas now that can end up being a 2 yard loss, and sometimes you got to put your head down and just go get that extra 2 yards. Like I think he's going to benefit a lot from not only an extra year in the weight room, but just the understanding of how football is when you're not just like a super freak superior athlete compared to everybody else on the field. But I think the running back position is good. I think the run game for A&M is going to take a major step forward. If the passing game can stay on par with what it's been at the good times the last couple of years, all of a sudden this A&M offense is really good. I think offensive line is what we need to talk about the most. So let's talk a little bit about the skill guys real quick before we get into the offensive line. I did a roster autopsy for A&M. We're doing one for each of the FBS schools in the state. Here was kind of my starting group for wide receiver and tight end with A&M. You tell me kind of your thoughts, Jay. I got Jade Walker, Moose Muhammad, Noah Thomas, Donovan Green as kind of the three starting wide receivers and tight end. I mean that'll play, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a pretty solid group right there.
Yeah. And I know like a lot of fans are kind of bummed about the loss of Evan Stewart. And uh, the one thing I'll say is I think at wide receiver, it's about the easiest position to replace a top level talent.
I agree.
As far as like there are a lot of options out there at the position. A lot of guys just train for that position, right? Like to play receiver coming out of high school. It's a position that a lot of people are uh, really, just wanting to play.
especially in this state with the 7-on-7.
Exactly. And like you said, I mean, once Moose Muhammad kind of got a little more play time, it felt like he took off,
Yeah,
right?
free Moose.
And then Janae Walker, I mean, he had several really impressive performances. Obviously, Noah Thomas is another one where I think it depends on him staying healthy,
Mhm.
but he can be a real weapon too.
Yeah, there's depth behind those guys. They add a few dudes through the transfer portal at tight end. Obviously, some talent at wide receiver
Yeah.
behind them.
Cyrus
Cyrus
Allen at wide
Allen,
receiver. Yeah.
right? Yeah, Micah Tease, like those guys can play, and we've seen them play. And production's production. I agree with you, right? Like maybe you can't replace the NFL talent of Evan Stewart, but you can replace the production, and that's what matters, right? Like maybe the guy you're bringing in isn't going to get drafted as high in the next NFL draft, but he can put up the same numbers and be as effective for you as a college football player. I don't if we're talking, I'll put it this way: if we're talking about A&M having a disappointing season, right, come November, I don't think it's going to be because wide receiver talent dropped off. Like I think they're going to be fine at the skill positions going into the year. A position group I think could determine whether A&M has a successful year or not is the next group, the offensive line. Um, is it as simple as new coach, new scheme? Let's figure out what they do well because there's plenty of talent on a roster. Or do you see this as kind of more of a long-term issue that this staff isn't going to be able to fix from day one because they just don't have the guys there to do it?
I am concerned about the offensive line. It's the fact that I feel like this group was so talented, and then I don't know exactly what happened, right? Like it's hard to pinpoint why it seems like this group hasn't gotten better. And obviously coaching is probably part of that equation, but I mean, there has to be something more to it. And I think part of it's going to be rebuilding the confidence of these guys, if we're being
Mm-hmm.
honest. Like I think there's an issue with the fact that these guys may not believe in themselves as much as they once did. And then part of that's also again health, right? When you start a whole bunch of different offensive linemen, it's hard to get that continuity that you need to be successful at the position group. But I do worry that this is going to be more of a long-term fix than quick and able to improve enough immediately. I think you'll see some improvement regardless, right? Like I do think they'll take a step forward again, mostly because I don't think they can take a step back at this point. Uh, but I just don't think you're going to take the leap completely necessary uh, to be where A&M fans want them to be.
Are there a couple of guys, or maybe even just one guy or no guy? Like, who are you confident in? Like, who do you think, like, okay, we're good at left guard, or we're good
Yeah.
at center, or we're good at, like, are there a guy or two that they can build around, or do you think every single one of these positions is wide open and they could use an upgrade?
I mean, it's tough. I feel like Trey Zune is really good at left tackle if he can stay healthy. I like both. I like some of the talent in the interior, but it's tough to say, hey, like they have the position nailed down because of the performance from last year.
Yeah.
Like I like Cam Dewberry a lot at guard. Uh, I like Mark Naboo a lot in the interior. I like Bryce Foster a lot when he's healthy and at 100%. Uh, but based off of what we saw last year, it's tough to just nail it down and say, hey, these guys have it locked in at those positions.
Here is what I put down as my projected starting offensive line, and I give everybody that this is a complete kind of educated guess, and this will change 15 times between now and probably in a spring practice, much less when we start. But Trey Zune at left tackle, obviously. I moved Chase Besantis in, right? Like have him play left guard. I feel like at right tackle with Ruben Fathery or Crown over, like you can find another tackle out there. Move Chase to guard, Bryce Foster if he's healthy, hopefully back at center and playing well, and then Cam Dewberry at right guard. That's not a, I mean, it's not a bad offensive line, but I agree with your point that like this isn't just a okay, well, bad offensive line coach out, good offensive line coach in, all of a sudden A&M's a top three offensive line in the SEC. Like it's going to take a couple of recruiting cycles, a couple developmental cycles, and maybe some hits in the portal to really turn that thing around completely.
Yeah, and I agree with you that Chase Basanta's moving to the interior is probably where he projects long term. Uh, I actually think Ernest Kronover did pretty well at tackle last year at points,
Yeah.
and I think him at right tackle could be a good spot. But again, I feel like the only position that is 100%, or not even 100%, but the most locked in position for me, I think at this moment is Tracy Young at left tackle. I
Yeah.
feel like that feels like the one where we don't really see a shift.
Yeah, to your point, Crownover earned the best PFF grades pretty routinely for A&M. He had fewer snaps, obviously, and you'd have to go in and see if that's just because he was playing against backups or what was going on there. Maybe they were giving him more help. I'm not breaking down every offensive line snap, but I do think that he's been good, and he's somebody that could play right tackle. But yeah, that to me, I mean, I think you agree. That's the spot, right? Like that at least offensively, we'll get into defense in a second. At least offensively, this whole thing hinges on if the offensive line can like be above average.
Yep. And again, like you said, it feels like the skill positions are there. It's just a matter of being consistent up front. And again, taking any step forward could be a huge in the confidence of Connor Wegman and allow him to make more plays too. So I do think that it's an area of the field that they've kind of attacked in the portal and in recruiting, somewhere that they've kind of said, hey, like we need to get better here, and sometimes bringing in some competition can light a fire too. Uh, but either way, this offense is going to go the way of this offensive line.
Yeah. And I think that's especially true with the type of offensive coordinator you hired. Because he's not going to turn into Zach Kitley, right? Like this isn't going to be like air raid, spread it out. I guess I shouldn't say that. I just kind of said Zach Kitley because of the Bailey Zappi stuff. Texas Tech ran the hell out of the ball last year, so I probably should find a different offensive coordinator to kind of use as that measuring stick. But I think the point remains, right? Like Colin Klein's going to adapt his system, and this isn't going to look like Kansas State's offense, but it's also not going to look like Mike Leach's offense either. Like it is going to be about punching people in the mouth and being physical, and that's why you hire a defensive-minded head coach too, by the way, right? Who wants his offense to help the defense as well. And so, to me, that makes the offensive line even more important because the offensive scheme is built, and they all are, but specifically this one is built around like mashing people in the mother effing mouth, right? And like that is when those Kansas State teams were really good, and that's when Texas A&M is going to be really good again, is when that starts to happen. And I think I agree with you that the current group on campus can get better, but they're not that. They're not going to be that yet,
No.
even with the coaching change. So it'll be interesting to see kind of because it's not really about the starting five. It's like, what are the seven? Like, who are the 7 or 8 offensive linemen that this staff is rolling with by the end of the spring? I think we'll at least know that.
Yep.
And so that'll be interesting to watch develop. Let's move to the defensive side of the ball, to God's side of the football, to talk about the defensive preview. Do you think it's safe to assume that this is Mike Elko's defense? Like, and he's just going to be just the defensive coordinator for all intents and purposes on top of the head coach?
I think that's a pretty safe assumption. Uh, Obviously,
That's why you hire him.
yeah, it's. I mean, and that was the issue, right? Is like, A&M wanted to go in. They had gone with the offensive coach, and it hadn't worked out. So now you switch over to the defensive side of the ball and get a Mike Elko, who kind of fits. I think he brought it up in his press conference, and I imagine that's what you want is that blue collar mentality, and that's what he wants into this defense. I mean, it's going to be. You're not going to have as much blitzing, I think, as you had last year, and at least not from the a 3-man front, right? Like you're not going to be bring pressure as constantly. But as far as who's calling the defense, I feel like it's going to be Mike Elko's, and then Bateman is going to be kind of maybe the play caller on the field, quote unquote. But it feels like there's no doubt, no debate. This is a Mike Elko defense.
Yeah, I mean he's going to hold the Joker card, right? Like when he wants to call something, he's going to be able to call it. For those not super into X's and O's and maybe don't really remember exactly like what it was looking like when he was there, like how would you describe a Mike Elko defense?
Yeah, I mean it's a very disciplined defense. You want to keep the opponent in front of you. Honestly, like the edge rushers weren't great under Mike Elko. I think that was one area that was kind of an issue is that maybe, you don't have that one-on-one defensive line win rate as often as you'd like. Uh, but the secondary played so well. I felt like the linebackers were always disciplined, and you just don't give up big plays. I think that's the hallmark of the Mike Elko defenses. They didn't allow big plays, and the gap discipline was great against the run. Uh, it's not necessarily the flashiest defense, like going back to like a Manny Diaz, where you're constantly bringing the pressure and getting in the quarterback's face. Like it's definitely a more conservative set, uh, but the execution always felt very, very uh, purposeful in what they're doing, and I mean every year under Elko it got better. So it's you're going to play well against the run. You're not going to give up big plays in the pass game. That's what you should expect out of a Mike Elko defense.
Sounds exactly like the fixes A&M needs based off what we saw last year, right? Like those are some things that struggled once he left. They were giving up too many big plays in the passing game, especially last year. The year before that, the run fits were pretty atrocious. And so like having it seemed like, and it makes sense, like knowing him kind of as a person, like not knowing him personally, but like just knowing his story. Like he's a smart, analytical, calm, collected kind of guy, right? And his defense looks like one that's ran by a smart, analytical, kind of calm guy. It's not like in your face, like it's a little risk adverse. Like I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but like that's how it feels like to me. Like he's not going to do anything crazy that puts him in danger just to like go do it. He'd rather just be sound and make you go like do it. You execute for 12 plays on this drive. And if you score a touchdown, great. But you're not going to do that 6 times in a game. So like we're going to hold you to 20 points and we're going to go win the football game. That's kind of feels like the philosophy to me.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that he's never going to have any exotics because he will blitz on occasion. You'll see some zone blitz and man blitz, but it's definitely more, as you said, risk adverse. Maybe that's not the right word, but it's not going to be flying around and really trying to penetrate as often. It's more going to be about gap discipline and keeping your guys in front of you.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a better term than bend but don't break, because that's just like
Yeah,
such a little cliche, dumb thing. But
definitely
like,
avoid saying that myself.
yeah, but it does feel like under in that vein, like where that is the concept of it. Like you are going to have to execute as an offense 10 to 12 to 13 times in a row. And like if you make any mistakes, we're going to turn the ball, we're going to get a turnover, we're going to make you punt, and then we're going to go score. How many transfers do you think start in this thing? Like I think it could be like as many as 5, like at least 3 or 4 for sure.
Yeah, because it feels like Nick Scorton is definitely going to be a starter
Yeah.
from day one.
Scooby
And then
Williams.
at the corner position as well, like it feels like those guys could rotate in. Uh, man, I think 4 is the number that
Yeah.
I'll go with.
Yeah, 2 or 3 in the secondary. I think Scooby Williams may start linebacker next to Torian York. Yeah, Nick Scorton's obviously going to start on the edge there for them. Who are the returners that are coming back that you think or that you're excited to kind of see with a new leash on life?
DJ Hicks, I think, is
Yeah,
one of the first ones that come to mind. Obviously, we saw him in the bowl game more than he'd played all year, and he looks good, right? Like I just kind of want to see where he goes from here. Torian York, who you mentioned, had an incredible year as a true freshman playing linebacker,
I love
has
that
another
guy.
year under his belt, and you have to imagine he's only going to improve. And then Bryce Anderson is a guy that I just think is a real playmaker on this defense. It'll be interesting to see him in kind of a different approach defensively, but I still think he's a factor wherever he factors in on the field, whether that's at a true safety role or more of a nickel role.
Yeah, I think Shamar Turner could have a big year, just like with a kind of a more defined, different role. I think that they could use him in a way that unlocks his potential sometimes. I'm glad that we are a Torian York podcast. Like people could go back to like the early days of the Aggie War Pod, and we were talking about Torian York before talking Torian York was cool. So yeah, I'm excited to see him as well. Bryce Anderson was going to be the one I highlighted, but I think another one that I'm excited to kind of see is Dalton Brooks.
Yeah.
Um, just a super talented. I mean, I'm obviously like a high school football dork. I work at Dave Campbell's, like you can connect those dots, but like he was just a blast, just an absolute joy to watch, and a really talented team there when he was coming out of high school. Didn't play a ton last year, right? Got some snaps here and there. But I think he is just super talented and one that I know it becomes very easy to think about just the transfers and what they're going to add and who's going to start out of that group. That sometimes it's easy to forget kind of the younger guys that are ready to take that next step up. I would not be shocked if he exited spring as one of the starters that was hard penciled in because he is super talented guy.
Yeah, no kidding. And it's just there's still like again, you talked about it. Don't get too caught up in the transfer portal and everything coming in, and then don't forget about some of the real talented guys that are still on this roster that A&M was able to keep in the midst of all of the chaos of the transfer portal this offseason.
What are your thoughts about Chappelle coming back at corner? Like, how big is that for A&M, or do you think he's more of a depth guy?
I don't know. I mean, we'll see. It felt like Chappelle was a guy that kind of similar to the offensive line. It almost felt like there's kind of a an expected trajectory as far as his play, and I don't know that we saw it quite to that level in 2023. I still think there's a lot of talent there, and I think he could easily still be a starter and improve. Uh, but I do think that there's obviously a lot of competition coming in the portal at the cornerback position. I think it was a spot where Elko felt like he had to address immediately, and those are some of the guys that we've highlighted. The corners are some of the guys that we've highlighted as far as guys that we expect to come in and make a difference, like a guy like Will Lee, a guy like Donovan Sanders from Cal Poly. Like there are guys at that position that are definitely coming in and expecting to take Tyree Chappelle's job.
Yeah, BJ Mays. Like there are some guys coming in,
Yeah,
and that's
Des
good.
Ricks. I mean, yeah,
Yeah, and it's good because I mean that was an to go from being the top rated pass defense in 2022, like at least in terms of yards given up, and some of that's because the run defense was so bad that teams didn't have to pass the ball, but to go from number one on that list when people were looking it up to like in the 90s or whatever it ended up being last year was crazy to watch just how big of a like I thought the front seven took a step forward last year, obviously with Edgerrin Cooper playing really well, Torian York coming on. Like A&M was better against but man, that pass defense was pretty bad. Like when opponents just decided, you know what, we're not even gonna F with this like front set. We're just gonna like find the mark on the outside and just throw it there over and over and over again. Like they did pretty much whatever they wanted to. So you had to bring in guys, even if it's just to like get the guys around you to step up.
yeah. And it's again, you don't know how much of the passing defense issues were masked by the fact that they couldn't stop the run 2 years ago.
For sure.
But yeah, I think you just kind of had to bring guys in, like you mentioned, where we're not sure exactly what the issue is, and it's probably not going to be instantly fixed. But getting new personnel in who has experience, who have played a lot of football to compete should only elevate everyone at the corner position.
How big of a step forward do you think is reasonable to expect with Elko coming in? Like, I guess in my mind, it feels like the side of the ball of the head coach that you're bringing in should like be the one that you can notice the change in first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you hire Lane Kiffin, the offense better look good right away, right? Or why
Yeah.
did you hire Lane Kiffin? How good do you think? How much do you think this defense can improve in this short of a turnaround? Just for reference, they gave up 22.1 points last year. That was 36th in the nation.
Yeah. The problem is, I think this defense, in spite of the issues against the pass, was still a pretty good defense,
Hmm.
especially against the run. And you lose guys like McKinley Jackson and Walter Nolan in the interior. The thing we'll say is, like, again, it still feels like there's a lot of talent on the defensive line to step up and replace those guys. Uh, but then you also lose Edrin Cooper, who I think was maybe the best linebacker in the country last year. I think that's a pot, like, you can debate that, right? Like, he is in the
Hmm.
conversation. Uh, so there's some holes that they have to fill uh, that make me kind of hesitant to say that this defense will improve. But by the same token, I like the scheme better. Like, I think
Yeah.
it'll be a better fit for the personnel, and I think Elko's better at adapting to what he has defensively too. So I do think they can improve, but I don't know. Like, they're again 36th in the country scoring defense, pretty good. Like, you're in
Mhm.
the top quarter of the country. Uh, so I don't know if I want to dive in and say, hey, they're going to improve scoring defense. I think the passing defense definitely improves, though. That's where I'll say, like, how we talk about the offensive line needing to improve. The secondary needs to improve the same way, and I'm more confident in the secondary taking a bigger leap forward on this side of the ball.
And so far, it's been proven that it's easier to plug and play transfer portal players defensively and have a first year jump than it is offensively.
Yeah.
Like, there's just less rhythm and like it's just not the same as
It's
the offense.
defense is more of a reactive position, and I think it's more of an instinctual battle on the defensive side of the ball. And I think for that reason, it serves like being able to plug and play a little bit better than the offense.
Yeah. All right. We will have, the rest of the next 6 weeks to talk more and more about the offense and defense and kind of what's going on here at A&M. I plan to be there a few times this spring when they allow us. Be interesting to kind of see what access is. That's this is just a media dork tangent of mine. It'll be interesting to see the access in the Mike Elko era, and like if it's different, if it's the same, kind of how it stacks up compared to some of the other P4 schools in the country. It has been fun watching Alabama beat writers be let out of prison with DeBoer coming in there and letting them watch some practice and having a little bit like having assistant coaches available. Like, they hadn't been available in like 13 years in Tuscaloosa. And like all of a sudden you can get an assistant coach and a player. I think it's important to do that nowadays. Like, unless you're Nick Saban, who like you can just do what you do because you're Nick Saban. But if you're going to recruit now in the NIL period, like, you got to let dudes be dudes. Like, you got to let your coaches get some shine. You got to let your players get some shine, or you're not going to get the good ones who, don't want to be like left off camera and never allowed to talk to media. So it's a new day in Alabama. It'll be interesting to see what it looks like in A&M. My hunch is that not much different. I mean, that was
Yeah.
just, like, and I don't blame coaches, by the way, for that, right? Like, if I was a coach, I'd let us watch stretches too, like why? So anyway, because I remember because I grew up around the Texas program, and you were allowed to, like, back then practices were just open, right? Like, you just go watch practice. Like, you could just park at LBJ Library, walk across the street, and go watch Nathan Vasher go up against Roy Williams. Like, it wasn't anything. But then Jordan Shipley got injured at one of those practices, and it got back to the parents of the Shipleys, like Mr. and Mrs. Shipley, on message boards back then. This was before Twitter, before the practice even ended, to allow the coaches to call and tell, and that was when that stopped at Texas. And so, like, with message boards and with social media, I totally get why coaches have just kind of been like, man, this isn't worth the hassle, and kind of outlawed people from seeing anything. But it does suck to just go and watch dudes like stretch and then be told to leave. Like, it's
Yeah.
not very fun because you have to go because it's your job. Like, if they give you 15 minutes, you have to go, right? You can't be the
But you
one that
get
doesn't
like
go.
nothing out of it.
Yeah, but you're just there to like take a little bit of a 5-second video to put on Twitter to like show that you're there, just to like be the guy that's there, right? But there's
Yeah.
no reason to do it. The Sugar Bowl was the best, right? We're all in New Orleans, like you've paid thousands of dollars. Your outlet has paid a lot of money for you to get there, all this kind of stuff, right? And you get like nothing, like you get absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Even though they have millions of snaps on film and everybody knows everything about everybody, you're not allowed to see anything. So the secrecy of college football is one of my quietly favorite parts because it's just very funny. If you really think about like how much they do to keep it secret when like how little this really matters, like in the grand scheme of things, and how like it comes down to like some dude that's like a chemistry major just like dropping a path, like it's just very
Yeah.
funny. It's just it's always cracked me up. Let's move to fourth down in the Ask Jay segment. We talked about this earlier. Motorsports is a big thing to Jay Arnold. He loves it. He talks about it on Twitter. You can see his reels on Instagram as well, discussing about it. I am not a car guy. I mean, I can change oil and tires and all that kind of stuff. I'm not an idiot. I had a dad, but like I don't. I just I've just never been into it. Right. It would you recommend if somebody was trying to get into motorsports, right? Trying to dip their toe into the racing game, would you recommend F1 or NASCAR for the newbie?
Well, it kind of depends on what you want out of it, right? Are you more into the uh, glitz and glam of the F1 European
Hmm.
lifestyle, or are you kind of looking more for a party? Because I can tell you which one tends more towards the party and which one tends more towards the flash
Let me
and
guess. Let me guess. Is it the one that started as like a way to celebrate running alcohol during Prohibition?
yeah,
Okay.
moonshiners.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say that NASCAR. Listen, I've always told people that the best way to like get into NASCAR is to go to a race because you will have a good time and you will see some things. And I don't want to discount F1 either. I haven't been to an F1 race myself. I watch both. But F1 I feel like is a little more reserved for the most part in the crowd. It's still a spectacle because I mean, look, you get up close to a fence and cars are coming by at 170, 180, 190 miles an hour. It is an addictive feeling. Like there is not much in the world to compare to just the raw speed and power of these cars, and whether that's NASCAR or F1 or going to your local dirt track and getting mud flung at you. All of these, it's such a cool experience. One thing I will say is take ear protection no matter what.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I love the Drive to Survive show. Like I'm watching it right now. And I tried to get into F1. And I don't know if the timing was bad or if this is just what F1 is, but like, Lewis Hamilton won. It felt like every single year. And then now Max Verstappen, or however you say it, wins every single year, right? And it feels like you're trying to get into a sport where you're just trying to root for third or second or
Yeah.
fourth or whatever. And that I guess maybe it's just the American sports fan in me, but it's just been a hard thing to really like sink my teeth into because I can't find the parody on race day. I can find it on the show because it's condensed into an hour and you get the behind the scenes stuff and you see the kind of the driver drama and so you get it in the show, but like on a Sunday morning or on a Saturday morning, like it's hard to like feel that and have that, and it does kind of have that country club feel as well.
Yeah.
And so like the viewer experience has been hard to like really get into.
And I do think that there's no doubt there's more parity in NASCAR. I
Yeah.
think you see, I mean, you look at the Atlanta finish a couple weeks ago with 3/1000ths of a second, a three wide finish between Daniel Suarez, Ryan Blaney, and Kyle Busch. Three different winners so far this year. Obviously, you had William Byron won the 500, Suarez at Atlanta, and then Kyle Larson most recently. And you don't have the like 18-second 25-second victories like you do in F1, where Max Verstappen's just kind of blowing everybody away.
Right.
But again, it comes down to what you enjoy more. NASCAR has more oval. So like if you it's the joke about making another left turn, right?
Mhm.
Like uh I definitely understand that. But again, I'm biased. I grew up watching NASCAR. It was the first sport that I really fell in love with. Uh I think it's a fantastic event. Uh, and again, like you can watch both, right? Like you can
Oh
watch
yeah,
Formula One and
sure.
NASCAR. Uh, Especially the timing, unless like the F1 race is in the United States, and even then, because they ran the Vegas race at like midnight, the timing sets up where you can watch both. And NASCAR actually has their own Netflix series now too,
Yeah.
where they talk about uh the playoff hunt from last year. So if you're looking for like a way to kind of get invested in a certain driver, you have that to watch as well. But yeah, if I'm saying like if you're looking to pick one or the other for the sake of, time, F1 races are a little bit shorter. So maybe you go that direction. If you're looking for being able to watch it live, NASCAR is obviously on the American time zones. It's probably easier to watch live versus some of the races in like Bahrain and places like that for Formula One.
I'll say this, the crowd is easier to look at in F1. Like there are some beautiful women at F1 races, like from what I can tell on the TV. Maybe it's just because they're in like places like Monaco and stuff like that, but like you watch the show and you're just like, holy crap, like that. I mean, that's not what racing fans look like when I've gone to a race in America, but I, grew up in the country and our racing is like dirt tracks and like Temple or something. So
I mean, it builds character, right? Like,
yeah.
I will say though, like with NASCAR, there's a lot of SEC overlap.
Yeah. Yeah, that Venn diagram is very circular. That Venn
Very, very
diagram is very
circular.
circular. Next up, so we haven't really recorded since most of this news has been in the cycle. That's how long it's been since we've recorded. The NCAA video game is officially a go. We thought it was a go. We figured it was a go. Everybody was trying to warn us it was a go to not, freak out. But it is coming in the summer. Players are going to get $600 in a free game. It seems like 10,000 plus have opted in. The only one who I think is noticeable so far that hasn't is Arch Manning. You think he maybe saw his overall grade and just like didn't want to see it in the game, or like what do you think? Like that's kind of what I think they're so protective of his image that they didn't want to see 76 Arch Manning or whatever. Like because he like tried to make it out in a statement like it was because it was a grind time situation where he's just trying to concentrate on the field. It may just be to get more money. Who knows? Like I don't even know.
Yeah. Listen, I wouldn't read too much into that, but yeah, the whole Arch Manning situation does feel like it's a very carefully tailored image.
Yeah, yeah. He's a
So that
Manning.
could be part of it.
He's a Manning. He's a Manning. Let me ask you this: when were you in the game?
I think, in the very last edition.
Yeah, you're right. 14.
So NCAA 14, I think I appeared as like a depth
Right.
player. I
Because
mean,
it wasn't
appeared.
85.
Right. Yeah.
It wasn't 85 back then. There would only be like 50 something players on the roster. Like you'd have to go fill in the rest of the roster if you were like one of those crazy people like I was that like downloaded all the, the
Yep.
apps and stuff. But like that's one of the things that's going to change with this one because they're letting everybody player opt in. Like the rosters are going to have everybody that's on scholarship. How old? So you were old enough. Like this didn't go away when you were like 10 or something like that. You were old enough to like maybe really be into this game, right? Like what is the Jay Arnold scheme? Like, what is your style? Like, what is your approach here on the NCAA video game?
So I remember, I think it was like NCAA '05 or '06, and I would play with USC, and I would run the wishbone,
Mm.
and I would just run the running back option play with Lindell White and Reggie Bush, just the whole game, and it would just be like pretty much undefendable. That was probably my go-to in NCAA. Had a lot of fun with that, but people did not appreciate it when I played against them.
I was I think I was like the normal one, right? Like I think like find the really athletic quarterback and go kind of like dual threat on it.
Yeah, like Pat White on that game was
Oh yeah,
unstoppable.
yeah. Like that was kind of the way there. Even like take a wide receiver, put it at quarterback if you needed to. So that was kind of my hope there. I'm excited for it, man. I bought a PlayStation 5 right before Christmas, like in anticipation for this. It also allowed me to get back into FIFA and stuff, so that's been cool. But like we're gonna turn this into content. Like the Republic of Football Network, like each podcast is gonna have like its team. Like you can be the Aggie one because I do the Texas podcast as well. So I can take the Texas slot. I don't think Aaron Hogan's going to mind me
Yeah, I was going to say
participating in this.
he probably isn't going to be the
Yeah,
one playing.
probably not going to be that. So I'll take the Texas spot. You can have this, but we're going to do like I'm going to have to learn what Twitch is because I have I watching people play video games. I know this is probably not the way to sell the eventual event that we are going to have people try to watch us play video games. But man, I don't understand that concept. That's how I know I'm old. Like I do not understand the concept of watching somebody play a video game. But we're gonna try to turn this into content and have some fun in the summer, and that kind of lead up between when it comes out and when games actually start.
Listen, if you get a whole bunch of folks in the Dave Campbell's office just playing in an NCAA tournament,
Yeah.
I can promise you it will create some strife and also create some great content in the meantime.
Well, I think we can do like dynasty mode, right? Where like,
Yeah.
everybody picks a team in the state or we do like a coin flip and, however we want to do it, right? And everybody can have their own team and we can just like, perpetually just keep this thing going, and try to figure out how to monetize it a little bit, and have some fun playing the video game. Okay, well, so I got to brush up on how to stop the option. That was also just kind of me trying to get a little bit of insider trader secrets there for when that comes out. But excited for that to come out. What team, if I took away A&M, what team do you think off the top of your head you're going to kind of lean into first here?
Oh, dude, I'd probably play with like Wyoming.
Oh, really? You're gonna go down. You're gonna go to like the cool places that you want to live, right?
Yeah, I would, live vicariously through my team. Maybe I'd go UTEP if we were limiting it to the state of Texas, right? Get to see the Sun Bowl on the I mean, that's one thing I'm excited about too, is like the renderings of the stadiums.
Yeah.
I have a feeling you're gonna get some pretty cool shots.
If we're talking dynasty, I'm gonna take UTEP to glory. I don't even think it's a secret. I was about to say it's secretly my favorite college in the state. Like I think I'm pretty open with my love for the Miners and my love for El Paso. I just think it's just a unique place in the state, right? Like it feels like a different place, and I just really enjoy the food and the people and the atmosphere, and a stadium that is in the mountains that looks upon Juarez, Mexico. Like the whole thing is it's just my vibe. I just really enjoy it. So I will take the UTEP Miners to glory. In terms of like most fun to play with, though, I'm trying to think of like the best dual threat quarterback like in the country and who that would be. Honestly, this isn't exactly that, but I think it may be Oregon that could be one of the more fun teams to play with, just with how they spread it out, their wide receivers and stuff like that. So yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. Maybe Cam Ward at Miami.
Kansas State could end up being a fun one.
Yeah, Kansas State, obviously really good.
I forgot the guy's name, but
Will Avery.
Yes. Avery, I think.
Avery Johnson.
Avery Johnson.
That's right. It's like kind of like the point guard back in the day for the San Antonio Spurs. Probably
Former
not as
Dallas
cool of a
Mavericks
voice
coach.
though. Yeah, probably not as cool of as a voice though. All right, next up on this Ask J segment here in Fourth Down, they are already trying to expand the playoffs that they have already expanded, but like not even played yet. The new proposal is 14-team playoff, 3 auto bids each for the SEC and the Big Ten. First, Jay, before I get your reaction, I'd like to say one thing. I told you so. Not you personally, Jay, but like everybody listening. This whole charade of this playoff was never to be inclusive and to let everybody in college football have their way into like equality and to play against Alabama. And oh my God, what if UTSA was able to get into the same dance as Alabama? It was nothing. It was not for that ever. They use that as like a banana in the tailpipe to distract you from allowing Ole Miss and Penn State to have successful seasons and make more money. That's all this was to make the teams at that second tier of those big ass conferences to like give them a reason not to pay coaches $70 million to go away, to change the math on what is success and what is not. And in the meantime, they can all make billions of dollars, and college football has become a competition to see which team can make more money. If you watch Twitter fan bases talk during the offseason. And I just can't. Like I already was mad that it was moving to 12 because again, this isn't to like have fairness and to let everybody compete. It was just to make more money the whole time. The 14 team thing with the 3 auto bids, while I concede that most years the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have 3 in there anyway. So like but it just feels like another thing to like jerry rig the sport towards the conferences that it's already tilting towards. And to me, it just feels like an illustration of like where we are as a country as well, right? Where it's just like the bigger you are and the more protected you are, the more you get. And then it just stays in this cycle to where like nobody else can compete with it. And it's just gross that it's happened to college football so quickly. And with
Gross.
everybody's applause as
Yeah.
well.
Unsurprising, unfortunately.
Oh my God, so gross.
Like we all knew it was going to come to this, and I think we've just been kind of waiting for the dominoes to fall. I guess the one like maybe glimmer of hope I have is that like outside of the SEC and Big Ten, it'll become kind of more fun to watch and kind of revert back to hey, just enjoying the game. Uh, but yeah, this I mean it feels like a ticking time bomb and not for good.
Yeah. For all of you out there that hate soccer, it is now European soccer. Like that is what like this is how the Champions League works. Like different leagues that are better get more bids into the Champions League than like the smaller, less money leagues, right? And then they have like an invitational. And again, you don't like the thing to me is like it doesn't need to happen. Like the SEC and the Big Ten is gonna get 3 teams in most years anyway, probably 4
Yeah.
some years. Like you don't have to make it as clear and obvious. And if you're the Big 12 and the ACC, you almost have to agree to it because you're not going to get 2 teams in most years, right? And like this is what they do. They like give you just enough to not starve, and like you can't just let yourself starve, right? Like the Big 12 can't just go like, well, we're second-class citizens, we might as well just like go start our own thing or whatever. You have to stay involved in it. And they like I don't know. Just like here's 2 bids, like be happy with this thing, and it's like no, man, like that's not how this is supposed to go. We just kind of lost the soul of college football, and it's just like gone, and you can't put that back in the bottle. But again, we all asked for this when we needed a clear-cut national champion. When it wasn't enough to beat your neighbors anymore, this is where it was headed. Like it used to be, as somebody who just wrote a book about college football in the state of Texas, that is going to be out in August, by the way. Very, very excited about it. It used to be enough to beat Texas, to beat TCU, to beat Baylor, to beat Arkansas, and then to go to the Cotton Bowl and try to beat the SEC champion, whoever you ended up, Notre Dame, whoever you played there. And that was a great year, right? Like 4 teams got claimed national champions or whatever. Nobody cared. Like it was fine. And when it becomes national championship or bust, this was the only outcome that it could have. And I just am surprised that so many people are surprised, I guess, is like my main takeaway.
Yeah, it was an inevitable conclusion, right? Like you flicked one domino down. This was always how it kind of ended up. Uh, you can probably blame TV for that, right? Like
Sure.
if
Sure.
we didn't watch all these games on a national scale, uh, it probably wouldn't have worked out like this, and people wouldn't care about other teams from different parts of the country. Uh, but yeah, college football at its best was regionality and regional rivalries and backyard brawl and uh, those types of games where 2 relatively close locales play against each other and just express all that hate in one game, and that's
Yeah.
all that mattered.
Yeah. Like I went to UTSA. I don't know anybody that went to like Alabama or Ohio State or Oregon. I know people that went to Texas State. So like UTSA beating Texas State is like a big deal, right? Because like I know people I can brag to. Like that's true for Texas and Texas A&M. Like, if you went to Baylor, Longhorns, Horned Frogs, Aggies. Like you don't know any Buckeyes. Like maybe a few. You don't know Iowa grads. Like who cares about that kind of stuff? But and again, I want to say this. I'm going to watch the hell out of the playoff. And I'm going to cover it, and I'm going to love college football, and it's going to continue to be like a major part of my life, right? But like,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that you can't also not like the direction it's going. Like, I think all of us vote, right? Like, like we, no matter what side of the aisle on, you probably feel that about like your country and your community and stuff as well, right? Like you can love something and then also not enjoy the way that it's going. And I guess to me, it just feels like every decision that's made in college football is made for a reason that doesn't line up with what I love about college football. Right.
Yeah.
And like maybe there's people out here listening that love that their university is making more money. Like to me, that doesn't matter. Like I don't care if the SID got a 20% raise. Like I don't like you got to hire four new coaches. Like congratulations or whatever. And so like it is just I don't know. It's weird to watch, and getting to 14 teams is absolutely going to make college. I'm worried that it's going to be college basketball, where unless you really, really love it, and like we love football, so we're going to watch it every week. But like, there's going to be a lot of people that are just like, well, I'll tune in December because like you don't that Alabama Georgia game in the regular season doesn't matter anymore. They're both going to make the playoffs. You're probably going to see it again, so it's not must watch TV anymore. That's kind of my main worry.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, again, like you said, like I'm still gonna watch, for the traditions and things. Like I'm still gonna get hyped when Virginia Tech runs out to Enter Sandman. Like I'm still gonna get pumped up about the 12th man. Uh, I'm still gonna love seeing like Coastal Carolina and Appalachian State fans just absolutely despise each other. Like these
Yeah.
are still things that I'm gonna enjoy, but uh the long-term direction, like there are parts that I'm definitely just not thrilled about.
Texas gave up over 300 games of rivalries to in-state opponents to go make $20 million more a year to make a playoff that they already made in the conference that they were just in.
Yeah.
Like
And
it
I guess
doesn't,
I guess the one benefit is that A&M in Texas is back, and that's
yeah,
kind of a selfish thing on my
and
part.
that'll be
But
cool. Texas Arkansas will be back. I hope to be at Texas at Arkansas because that's great, right? Like I'm old enough to have like really loved the Southwest Conference. I made the same complaint as an 11-year-old when the Southwest Conference was going away,
yeah,
and so to me it just feels like unnecessary. And if you think college football is better if your team makes a lot of money, then I can see how all of this stuff helps. But like this is not like I don't care. Like I get turned off by
that's
the
not why we
NFL.
watch.
Yeah, this is not my thing, right?
Like
So
if
like
you're looking for that opinion, this is not the right
yeah,
podcast
like
for
I
you.
just I'm in it for the football and like the talking shit, right? And like I just
Yeah.
like that I don't know. Anyway. So it'll happen, right? Because they're going to make more money, and one day it'll be like 24, one day it'll be 36, and one day it'll just be like one big playoff. Before we get out of here, this is one that you wanted to add. I don't know if I can really talk too much about it because I am a ball of emotions. On March 10th, Sunday, there is a pretty big football match across the pond in Liverpool, England. As the good guys, as LFC, the Reds, take on Man City and all of their money that probably comes from somewhere not good. So pick your sides wisely if you're a neutral. I would maybe think about those things as you were picking your favorites. But jokes aside, it is the biggest soccer game in England of this season. The winner probably wins the EPL championship. The loser, if it's Man City, probably wins the EPL championship. I think Man City is going to win this thing no matter what. But it will be really cool if Liverpool could win at home, and especially just Klopp's last season, if they can have one more of these like shockers. I'm pretty excited about it. I'm trying to keep my hopes down, my expectations down. But if you're looking for if you're not a soccer fan and you're this far into this podcast and you got nothing going on Sunday morning, give this one a chance and tell me if you think soccer is boring. That's all. That's all I'm going to ask you.
It is going to be an incredible atmosphere at Anfield. Like I just know that place is going to be belligerent.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's going to feel like a European night,
yeah,
and
it's
they come alive for that stuff.
it's going to be huge, and I mean it's also just kind of like these are the two teams that have been at the top for the past few years, and honestly, I would prefer that than like let's say the team that's currently in third getting into the conversation as a Tottenham fan. But
You don't have to worry about that.
yeah, I
They're
mean,
not. They're not. They're like I don't know. It's like those memes with the three dragon heads, and one of them looks all silly and drunk and stuff like that. Like that. I
yeah,
mean, they're beating up on the little guys, but like I don't think Man City or Liverpool even knows Arsenal's around.
yeah, it's close on the table, but yeah, no, I agree with you where this feels like it's either Liverpool or Man City, and like you said, feels mostly like Man City
Yeah,
just because of
yeah.
the depth and obviously Holland being healthy. But
I honestly think I would bet on Man City winning the league by 6 or more points than I would Liverpool winning the league. Like I think it's
yeah,
more likely that Man City do what it did last year and just like create this like space at the end that makes you forget that they were down 10 points with 10 to go. I think they just stormed the castles, win pretty much every single game, win the league pretty easily. That's my view of how this is going to go.
Yeah.
But I think Sunday is going to be a banger. Like it is going to be. I'm telling you again. If you're neutral, who's just like you don't know where to start with soccer, it's only World Cup or nothing for you. You probably don't have much going on Sunday morning. Like just watch it, and it'll change your concept of like soccer and like what it is. Like at the highest level, it is a fun sport.
It is the atmosphere that I think most closely resembles like a big time college football rivalry game.
Yeah.
Where it will be electric, the fans will be loud. They're a little bit more organized with their shouting, right?
Mhm.
Like the songs and things of that nature are a little more organized, but it's so awesome to hear. Definitely a dream of mine to eventually experience that atmosphere in person. But again, like if you are on the fence and maybe thinking about getting into soccer, this will be a game that you should absolutely watch.
Yeah, to further sell folks on the Liverpool dream here, I haven't workshopped this in my mind. I'm just riffing off the top of my head. I think I would describe Liverpool as very like Aggie like in the history and the fandom of it's a working blue collar town, right? This is not London. This is not London, England, right? Like Liverpool is a steel working old school blue collar town. It is the Beatles are from there. That's about as much flash as Liverpool's ever seen. A lot of history, a lot of passion. Sometimes people will say that they can't understand how they're talking. Just a lot of similarities.
The
Um,
Scouse accent, baby.
right, the Scouse accent kind of
Chicken
trips
and a
people
can of
up.
Coke.
Yeah, right. And so like it is a unique place into of itself. And I think that's a great way to put it. It is as close as you're going to find to like college type atmosphere in professional sports, because the passion there is for real. Next year I turn 40. In 2025 I turned 40. And so I've already let everybody who is important know that in March of next year, before magazine season gets going, I'm going to make a trip to Liverpool and go watch a football game, or we'll go watch a soccer game at Anfield, because I got to check it off the list. I wasn't allowed to leave the country for a few years, and now I can. So I got to take advantage of that. So pretty excited about that, but we'll see.
Yeah, again, just going to be an incredible game. I'll be watching Tottenham and Aston Villa play, which is also kind of I mean, it's for fourth
It's
place.
important. It's an important
It's
game.
still an important game.
Yeah.
Just not quite as
Yeah.
important as that Liverpool Man City game.
Yeah, it'll be a good one. It'll be a good one. All right, man. It's like riding a bike, dude. It's like we never left. Enjoy the show there with Jay. Talked a lot about Aggie football, spring practice getting going here pretty soon. Spring game on April 20th. I will probably be there. See if we can talk Jay into showing up as well. We'll be back. We're going to do this weekly through spring ball and talk about it. So we will see you and talk to you next week on the Aggie War Pod, Dave Campbell's Texas Football, and the Republic of Football Network.